our monument and created a defense fund for the fight. And I want to recognize our Council President John Ward, our Council Vice President Dan Gendron, Councilman Bob Morrow, Councilman Chris Beauchamp. We also have with us our State Representative Robert Phillips, representative from the neighboring town McLaughlin. So I want to thank them for being here. I have to tell you, after we first got the letter from this organization of atheists, many people started calling and questioning. Many people didn't know what this monument was about. And I have to tell you, I've done a little searching myself to learn the history of this monument. And it's something I want to talk about a little bit so that when we leave here, we all have a better understanding of what we're here fighting for. After World War I, the city of Woonsocket's leaders were approached by the veterans organizations and asked for a tribute to our fallen boys that had given their lives in the greatest war, the war to end all wars. And as such, our city set forth to name 10 squares in honor of these veterans. And one of those was right here. And it was named in honor of William Jolliker. After the flood of '55, the road that ran right through here was rechanneled and moved back, and the monument and the square stayed here. William Jolliker lived on Golden Avenue here in Woonsocket. He was single. He was 28 years old when he registered and signed his draft card, as many of you here can understand. I've seen a copy of his draft card, and I saw the signature at the bottom of that draft card where he signed his soul over to defend this country. And in looking at his signature, little did he realize that when he was signing that piece of paper, he was kicking off what would end us right here today. He was part of a group of Woonsocket soldiers that went off to fight and became very instrumental in some of the last battles of World War I. They were valued by the leaders in Europe because they spoke French. That recognition became very important as the war soon ended, but unfortunately, Private Jolliker, who was a member of the 306th Infantry and 77th Infantry, lost his life. He never made it home, and he is buried in France today. He was honored by the Grand Commander of the Allied Forces, who came here to Woonsocket to dedicate Place Jolliker, as it was designated. Ferdinand Foch, the Grand Commander, when you read the historical accounts of that day, it was remarkable, and I can only envision what it was like. And it was probably similar to this, but so much more. The streets of Woonsocket were lined several people deep. Soldiers lined the streets in their uniforms. Thousands of children stood out singing patriotic hymns and songs to the Grand Commander. It was in the evening. They lit streets with flares, and they said it was like daytime. Bells were ringing in the fire stations, in the churches across the city. And the commander came here and laid a wreath and dedicated this place in honor of Private Jolliker. He was quoted in the papers that day saying that it seems like my homeland to me, to be thus greeted everywhere with my own native tongue, and by so many uniforms which are so familiar to me. France fully appreciates the wonderful help of the American soldiers in the Great War and is duly grateful. Which brings us forward several years and another World War later, and brings us to the Gagne brothers. As the General mentioned, Bernadette Gagne was a Woonsocket woman. Was from Canada originally. In 1942, Mrs. Gagne's husband, and I'm reading from an article that we got from February 16, 1952. In September December of 1942, Mrs. Gagney's husband, Joseph Gagney, a well-known city printer, died very suddenly. Her son Louis, 23, who was working on a government defense building project in Newfoundland, was called home for the funeral. He stayed with his mother for a few weeks and then boarded the steamship Caribou for the return trip. In the early dawn of October 17th, the horrible hiss of a German torpedo was followed by a split second by the thunderous explosion aboard the Caribou just off the coast of Newfoundland. Louis Gagney was lost less than 5 weeks after his father's death. Only a few short years later, December 9th, 1945, as a thin line of U.S. infantrymen stormed ashore in Lake Island in the Pacific, they were met by a withering hail of enemy fire. One of those who fell in death was Private First Class Alexander O. Gagney, 30 years old and the second oldest son of Miss Gagney. After taking her husband and 2 sons, death had not finished with her. On February 7th, 1949, Sergeant Henry A. Gagney, 38, her firstborn and last remaining son, suddenly collapsed and died at Harmon Field on the island of Guam. The tragedy itself is very touching, but more so when you understand that Mrs. Gagney didn't collapse in sorrow and hide up in her apartment or her home. She stayed involved and joined every military organization. She organized the Gold Star Mothers in this area. She was said, after speaking to family members, to have very proudly wore her Gold Star's mother's pin with not 1, not 2, but 3 gold stars. She continued this work for the veterans of this country until her death at 96 years old in 1980. I can tell you, after learning this and really personalizing what this is all about, it has renewed my sense of resolve to fight for this monument. We will continue to stand strong. If Mrs. Gagney can give her 3 sons, I can give a fight for her sons' monuments. So let us say right here and right now that when this is all over, not only will we renew and rebuild this monument, there will be a new monument for Mrs. Gagney right next to it. So as the General said, the line in the sand is drawn, and we will fight, and we will fight, and if we lose, if they determine to come and take this monument, they will have to take me with it and everybody here. So to Private Joliker, to all of the Gagney brothers and Mrs. Gagney, this is my sworn oath to fight for this monument to you and to the great soldiers of this country who gave their lives for this freedom. To all of you, thank you so much. We are going to continue to fight. I ask you to visit the city's website. We've put up a link to be able to contribute because this fight is going to cost money. We've promised that if we are able to win this without the need for the money is going to go to rebuild this monument and all of the monuments to our soldiers in the great city of Woonsocket. I just want to give my heartfelt thanks to all of the men in uniform here today. To all of our soldiers, to all of our firefighters, our police officers, those that defend us day in and day out, we stand with you. We thank you for your service, and we continue to stand with you going forward. God bless all of you, and God bless America.